It is the evening of April 14, 1912. The Titanic, the so-called unsinkable ship, is gliding across the North Atlantic at nearly 22 knots. The sea is unusually calm, like polished glass, with no moonlight to reveal the dangers ahead. To the more than 2,200 souls aboard, it feels like the perfect night, yet beneath the surface, fate is already in motion. As the clock strikes 6 p.m., the ship's rhythms are familiar. In first class, stewards hurry through mahogany-paneled corridors, carrying menus prepared by the world-famous French chef, Auguste Escoffier's protégés. Tonight's dinner features oysters, consommé, roast duckling, and a delicate Waldorf pudding. The men dress in crisp white tie, the women in flowing gowns embroidered with pearls, sequins, and lace. In the smoking rooms, gentlemen exchange cigars and discuss business, politics, and the sheer wonder of this floating palace. The glittering chandeliers, the music of the string quartet, and the scent of polished wood combine into an atmosphere of effortless luxury. But this is only one version of Titanic's evening. On the lower decks, far away from the carved oak and velvet curtains, third-class passengers prepare their own meals in crowded dining rooms. For them, supper is simpler: bread, cheese, stews, and tea, but still far better than what many knew back home. Children run along narrow corridors, their laughter echoing against steel walls, while families gather around tables to sing folk songs from Ireland, Sweden, Italy, and beyond. For these passengers, Titanic is not just a ship, it is hope, a promise of a new life in America. In second class, teachers, clerks, and middle-class travelers experience something in between. They enjoy hearty meals and polite conversation, often marveling at how grand their accommodations feel compared to any vessel they've known before. They, too, walk the promenade deck, watching the stars flicker above the black Atlantic, unaware that ice drifts silently in the darkness. And while passengers dine, laugh, and dream, Titanic's crew toils in hidden corners. In the boiler rooms deep below the waterline, hundreds of firemen, trimmers, and greasers shovel coal into roaring furnaces. The heat is unbearable, nearly 100 degrees Fahrenheit, sweat pouring from their bodies as they keep the ship's mighty engines alive. For these men, there is no luxury, no orchestra, no laughter. Only the endless clang of shovels and the rumble of steel. Above deck, wireless operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride sit in their cramped Marconi room, overwhelmed by messages. They tap out telegrams for wealthy passengers desperate to send word to loved ones. Yet among the chatter, ice warnings from other ships begin to trickle in. Some are acknowledged. Others are dismissed as routine. The operators, exhausted from days of work, hardly realize how important these warnings will soon become. Elsewhere, little details of the night play out almost like a stage set. The Strauss family, owners of Macy's, take an evening stroll on deck, enjoying the fresh Atlantic air. Colonel John Jacob Astor and his young bride retreat to the first-class lounge, drawing whispers from onlookers. In third class, young Irishmen play cards while mothers put their children to bed. A few passengers write final letters, later found washed ashore, filled with excitement about their journey. At 9 p.m., Captain Edward Smith makes his rounds, a calm and reassuring figure with his white beard and steady eyes. For many passengers, his presence itself feels like a guarantee of safety. Smith retires to his cabin early, unaware that this will be his final night alive. By 10 p.m., the decks grow quieter. The ship's band plays gentle tunes in the first-class lounge. Couples stroll along the promenade, admiring the stars. Some note the unusual stillness of the water, remarking that the sea looks like a mill pond. But the calm is deceptive. That same stillness makes it harder to spot floating icebergs. And in the distance, massive walls of ice drift silently, waiting. At 10:30, the temperature drops sharply. Breath becomes visible in the cold night air. Stewards bring blankets to shivering passengers, while in third class, travelers bundle children into shared beds. Few suspect that the chill is a warning sign of what lies ahead. Meanwhile, on the bridge, First Officer William Murdoch keeps watch, his eyes scanning the black horizon. Lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee climb into the crow's nest, wrapping scarves tightly against the bitter wind. Their binoculars, however, have been misplaced, a small but fateful detail. Fleet later recalled that the night was the clearest I ever saw, but I could not see an iceberg until it was too close. At 11 p.m. lights in the grand dining rooms are extinguished. Passengers retire to their staterooms. Some read, others play cards, and many simply fall asleep in the belief that they are aboard the safest vessel ever built. Few sense the ticking clock of disaster. And yet, in the ship's underbelly, water begins to seep through microscopic cracks from the earlier voyage. No one notices. No alarm is raised. Titanic sails on, its fate sealed. By 11:30 p.m., the atmosphere aboard is serene, almost dreamlike. The hum of the engines, the gentle vibration of the decks, and the calm seas lull many into deep sleep. In the crow's nest, Fleet and Lee strain their eyes into the darkness, whispering to each other to stay awake. Minutes later, one will spot a shadow, a shape darker than the night itself, and ring the bell 3 times. For now, however, Titanic's passengers remain blissfully unaware. They dream in gilded cabins and crowded bunks, unaware that in less than an hour, history's most infamous disaster will begin. The calm before the ice has reached its final moments. Throughout April 14, 1912, the Titanic's last full day at sea, a stream of warnings drifted invisibly across the Atlantic. Other ships, plowing through the same frigid waters, had spotted icebergs and sent urgent wireless messages. And yet, by the time night fell, those warnings had been scattered, delayed, or simply ignored. The story of Titanic's iceberg warnings is one of exhaustion, overconfidence, and missed opportunities, a haunting reminder of how disaster often comes not through a single mistake, but through many small ones combined. That morning, the Caronia, steaming westward ahead of Titanic, sent word of bergs, growlers, and field ice directly in her path. The message was acknowledged and logged. But to Titanic's officers, the warning was hardly alarming. Icebergs in April were a known risk. Titanic, after all, was considered unsinkable. As the day continued, more warnings arrived. The Baltic reported large icebergs, relaying their coordinates with precision. Captain Smith even showed the note to J. Bruce Ismay, chairman of the White Star Line, who was strolling the decks. Smith tucked the warning away, promising it would be delivered to the bridge. Yet whether it reached every officer on duty remains unclear. In the wireless room, operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride faced a different battle. For them, Titanic was not only a ship at sea, but a floating post office. Wealthy passengers flooded them with messages to New York, news for family, instructions for business, even gossip to be printed in newspapers. The workload was relentless, the sound of tapping keys echoing in their cramped cabin until their ears rang with Morse code. That afternoon, another warning came, this time from the Californian, a modest cargo vessel nearby. It reported being stopped by thick ice directly in Titanic's path. The message was clear, urgent, and potentially life-saving. But Phillips and Bride, overwhelmed and fatigued, placed it on the pile. Passengers' telegrams, they believed, took priority. Titanic's luxury service demanded it. By early evening, the America transmitted yet another warning: 2 large icebergs sighted dangerously close. This message, oddly enough, was never delivered to the bridge. Historians still debate why. Some suggest the operators, distracted by private messages, let it slip. Others believe it was handed over but never logged properly by the officers. Either way, Titanic continued westward, blind to the obstacles ahead. At 9 p.m., the Mesaba sent perhaps the most detailed warning of all: a massive ice field stretching across Titanic's path, filled with bergs and smaller fragments. This was no vague alert, it was a map of danger, transmitted in precise coordinates. Phillips received it. But overwhelmed by the backlog of passenger traffic, he never sent it to the bridge. Later, during inquiries, the Mesaba's message was described as the single most important warning that night. And yet, no officer ever saw it. By 10:30 p.m., fatigue was setting in. Phillips had been working nearly non-stop for more than 14 hours. Bride, just 22 years old, tried to keep pace. Their fingers ached, their minds dulled by the endless stream of dots and dashes. And still, messages came. It was then that the Californian, only a few miles away, tried once more. Its lone wireless operator, Cyril Evans, spotted Titanic's signal strength on his receiver. It was so strong, it nearly burst through his headset. Evans tapped out another urgent warning: "We are stopped, surrounded by ice." But instead of gratitude, Phillips snapped back with irritation. "Shut up. I am busy working Cape Race," he barked, referring to the station relaying passengers' messages to Newfoundland. Evans, tired and alone, switched off his set and went to bed. It was the last chance Titanic had to hear from a ship that would soon be within sight of her distress rockets. On the bridge, meanwhile, the officers discussed ice half-heartedly. Captain Smith had adjusted Titanic's course slightly to the south, based on earlier warnings, but he did not reduce speed. The White Star Line prized punctuality, and Smith was under pressure to make good time. To slow down in the middle of the North Atlantic, unless faced with certain danger, was considered unnecessary. Even so, some crew members felt uneasy. The temperature had dropped sharply, and the air bit cold against the skin. The sea lay eerily still, the so-called dead calm that experienced sailors knew could mean drifting ice nearby. In the crow's nest, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee wrapped their scarves tighter, peering into the black horizon. Without binoculars, every shadow seemed uncertain. They were unaware of just how many warnings their ship had already received, and dismissed. In the first-class lounges, however, the mood remained one of confidence and leisure. Passengers exchanged stories of near misses on other voyages, secure in the belief that Titanic was stronger, safer, and more advanced. She could not sink, many thought. Even if she struck an iceberg, her watertight compartments would keep her afloat. It was a comforting illusion, born of brochures, advertisements, and the shipbuilders' proud claims. But the iceberg warnings told a different story, one that went unheeded. At least 6 separate messages had reached Titanic that day, each more urgent than the last. And yet, through a mixture of human error, exhaustion, and misplaced priorities, the ship sailed forward at nearly full speed into one of the heaviest ice fields ever reported in the Atlantic. At 11 p.m., Jack Phillips tapped out his last routine messages for the night, still relaying passenger telegrams. The warnings were behind him, forgotten in the clutter of paper slips and static. Bride prepared to relieve him at midnight. Neither man knew that within 30 minutes, they would be frantically sending the most desperate distress signals in maritime history. The stage was set. Titanic had been warned, again and again, but she did not listen. And as the great liner plowed forward through the silent, icy waters, the unseen wall of ice lay waiting just ahead. It is 11:40 p.m. on the night of April 14, 1912. The Titanic, slicing through the dark, frigid Atlantic waters, is blissfully unaware that the iceberg spotted by Frederick Fleet is about to change history forever. In the crow's nest, Fleet's eyes widen as a dark shape emerges from the blackness, a jagged silhouette against the starless sky. He fumbles for the bell and strikes it 3 times, calling down to the bridge below. "Iceberg right ahead," comes the urgent cry, slicing through the calm. On the bridge, First Officer William Murdoch springs into action. Orders are barked: hard starboard. Full reverse. The great ship's massive hull begins to shift, but physics and momentum work against them. Titanic's enormous size makes her slow to respond. And in those crucial seconds, the iceberg scrapes along her starboard side, tearing through the steel plates and opening seams in the hull. To most on board, the collision is barely perceptible at first. In the opulent first-class dining rooms, crystal glasses tremble and fine china rattles, but diners hardly notice. Some passengers feel a gentle shudder, a soft jolt that could be mistaken for the engine's hum. Yet deep below, in the engine and boiler rooms, men feel something far more terrifying: the roar of metal ripping, the sudden rush of water creeping into spaces designed never to hold it. The iceberg does not rip the Titanic in half. That is a misconception widely held today. Instead, it punctures the hull across several compartments, tearing open 5 of the 16 watertight sections along the forward starboard side. To the untrained eye, the ship remains intact. Yet the damage is fatal. The compartments, designed to keep water isolated, cannot contain the massive inflow. Gravity does the rest. Below decks, chaos begins to unfold, though it is hidden from the upper decks. Firemen, stokers, and engineers feel the icy water creeping along steel floors. Steam hisses from ruptured pipes. Gas lamps flicker. Many men, exhausted from the day's labor, suddenly realize their world is filling with water. There is no time to escape, and yet, instinct drives them forward. They begin shutting bulkhead doors, trying desperately to slow the spread of water. Their bravery is unseen and unrecognized, but crucial in keeping the lights on for hours, giving passengers a chance to escape. Above deck, passengers' senses catch only fragments. Some hear a faint grinding sound. Others feel a slight lurch. In third class, a few awaken from the odd vibration, thinking perhaps the ship has hit a small swell or that the engines are faltering. A young mother comforts her child, whispering that it is nothing to fear. A group of Irishmen continues card games, puzzled by a sudden chill. For many, the night remains calm, the luxury intact, and the horror unrecognized. Yet the water is spreading, slowly but inexorably. Titanic's design, so proud and modern, becomes a silent executioner. Officers begin conducting their inspection, measuring water levels in the forward compartments. Murdoch and his team realize the grim truth: the ship is doomed. Still, the outward appearance remains serene. The band continues to play in first class, though they will not last long. In the ship's grand halls, the first whispers of alarm pass from steward to passenger. Some are reassured: it is only a small leak, they say, encouraged by crew members who are themselves trying to maintain order. Others begin to feel unease. Life jackets are distributed quietly, a precautionary measure, though few understand why. The juxtaposition of calm and chaos creates a surreal atmosphere, a night where luxury and terror coexist in the same space. Meanwhile, in the darkness below, men struggle against fate. Firemen fight rising water, pumps fail, and the smell of salt water mixed with coal smoke fills the air. Their struggle is silent, no cries for help escape. Most will not survive. Their courage will later emerge only through survivor testimony and recovered letters. These unseen acts of bravery form the backbone of Titanic's final hours, even as the world above remains oblivious. On the deck, the first signs of panic are subtle. A passenger steps into a corridor, noticing a slight tilt. A steward reassures a family as a small stream of water trickles into the lower deck. These small moments, seemingly insignificant at the time, foreshadow the escalating terror that will soon grip every corner of the ship. By 11:50 p.m., Titanic has struck a grim balance. The bow begins to settle lower, and water fills compartments faster than the pumps can expel it. The calm seas continue, reflecting the moonless sky, but beneath the surface, a deadly rhythm has begun. Every compartment that floods adds weight, every second draws the ship closer to its inevitable fate. This is the moment where the Titanic, so long celebrated as the pinnacle of human engineering, becomes a stage for human endurance, fear, and heroism. The iceberg's damage is precise yet cruel. It leaves the ship mostly intact, creating a deadly illusion that survival is still possible. It is a night of contrasts: calm above, chaos below, luxury above, terror below, hope above, death lurking in silence. Within minutes, the Titanic has passed the point of no return. Officers know it, the crew knows it, yet many passengers still remain unaware. The first domino has fallen. The collision that seemed gentle, almost trivial to some, has set the stage for history's most infamous maritime disaster. And as the Titanic drifts silently forward, slicing through the icy Atlantic waters, the iceberg, indifferent and eternal, rests just behind, a frozen witness to the horror that is about to unfold. As the Titanic's bow began to settle deeper into the icy Atlantic, the ship's atmosphere transformed into a surreal collision of calm and terror. The lights still glimmered in the first-class cabins, the music faintly drifted through corridors, and yet, beneath that fragile veneer of normalcy, chaos was beginning to creep into every corner of the ship. This was the night where the invisible became visible, the hidden struggles of ordinary people who would later leave only fragments of their voices behind. Below decks, third-class passengers stirred with unease. Families who had spent the evening singing, eating, or playing cards were abruptly awakened by the cold damp air creeping through their corridors. Mothers, gripping their children tightly, whispered reassurances they barely believed. Fathers fumbled to find life jackets hidden under bunks, the coarse material stiff and unfamiliar against their fingers. Many were strangers to the procedures of a luxury liner, and the labyrinthine corridors made navigation almost impossible. Locked gates and barriers, meant to enforce immigration regulations, now became deadly obstacles. Some families were separated within minutes, lost in the maze of steel passageways. In the engine rooms and boiler compartments, the cries of men battling the rising water went largely unheard. Firemen and stokers, exhausted from an entire day of grueling labor, refused to abandon their posts. They closed bulkheads, fired up pumps, and struggled to keep the massive engines running, ensuring that the lights, the elevators, and the few functioning communication lines remained active. Their voices were drowned by the roar of water flooding into steel compartments, the hiss of escaping steam, and the clanging of metal. Many would perish in these hidden spaces, their heroism recorded only in survivor testimonies and later memorials. Above, on the main decks, the illusion of order persisted, but cracks were forming. A steward in first class calmly directed a passenger to a lifeboat, though his own heart raced with anxiety. In lounges, some passengers whispered rumors, trying to make sense of the strange shudder earlier in the night. Others dismissed it with nervous laughter, clutching wine glasses and playing cards to maintain a sense of normalcy. The juxtaposition was stark, terror and routine, dread and indulgence, coexisting on the same decks. In the promenades and cabins of second class, the panic was more palpable. Some passengers, aware of the reports of ice, began dressing in heavier clothing and locating life vests. Yet confusion reigned. Crew instructions were sometimes contradictory. One steward would tell a group to stay put, while another urged them toward the lifeboats. Misinformation spread quickly, amplified by fear. Young couples clutching hands searched for an exit, older passengers clung to their belongings, hoping they might be of use or comfort in the uncertain hours ahead. Meanwhile, the Titanic's musicians, a string ensemble in the first-class lounge, faced an impossible decision. Reports vary, but most accounts agree that they continued playing for as long as possible. They alternated between waltzes, hymns, and sentimental ballads, aware that panic could spread faster than any warning. Their music, gentle and haunting, provided a thin thread of calm in the descending chaos. Some survivors later said that it kept them walking, gave them courage, or masked the faint but growing noises of the ship's flooding compartments. Others described it as eerie, beautiful, but entirely incongruous with the horror that was creeping aboard. Elsewhere, acts of quiet heroism emerged, often unnoticed. A steward guided third-class families through the maze of staircases and corridors, blocking a heavy door to allow children to escape first. A young man, realizing that a lifeboat had room, carried a frightened toddler to safety. In one small cabin, a mother shielded her child from cold water seeping beneath the door, whispering lullabies even as the steel beneath them trembled. These moments, fleeting and almost invisible, would never make headlines, yet they captured the very essence of human courage in extremis. Not all stories were noble. Fear brought out darker instincts as well. Some men attempted to board lifeboats reserved for women and children, pretending to be family members or attempting bribes. Arguments erupted in corridors, sometimes escalating to shoves or even threats with the limited tools at hand. In this confined, freezing environment, social order broke down in subtle ways, revealing both the best and worst of humanity. One of the most haunting aspects of this night was how many voices were simply unheard. Passengers' screams, the panicked calls from corridors, and the muffled cries from below decks were often swallowed by the enormity of the ship itself. The walls, steel and impervious, acted as both structure and silencer. These hidden moments, documented only through later survivor accounts, offer a stark contrast to the widely held narrative of calm and orderly evacuation. The reality was far messier, far more human, and far more tragic. As the minutes ticked toward midnight, the Titanic's passengers began to grasp the scope of the disaster. The tilt of the ship became noticeable, water seeped into more cabins, and lifeboat officers began calling passengers to the decks. Confusion and fear intertwined with faint hope that the ship's lights, the music, and the grandeur of its halls might somehow protect them from the freezing sea. Yet even as doors were unlocked and the first lifeboats prepared to launch, many voices, especially those from the lower decks, would never again be heard. This was a night defined by contrasts, music and chaos, luxury and survival, heroism and selfishness, calm facades and terror beneath the unseen struggles. Whispered instructions, and muffled cries formed the hidden heartbeat of Titanic's last night, a heartbeat that, for many, would abruptly stop in the freezing Atlantic waters. It was a night where the ordinary became extraordinary, where courage and fear intertwined, and where the voices in the dark would leave an echo lasting more than a century. The ship continued its descent into disaster, each corridor and cabin telling its own story. These stories, often overlooked, remind us that Titanic's tragedy was not only about the ship, but about the people, their fears, their bravery, and the choices they made when confronted with the unimaginable. As the Titanic's bow settled lower into the freezing Atlantic, the spotlight shifted to the ship's lifeboats, a symbol of hope, a promise of survival, and, ultimately, a grim test of human decision-making. Despite being hailed as the unsinkable ship, Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats, enough for just half of those aboard, and yet, in a tragic twist of fate, even those lifeboats would not always be filled to capacity. The first lifeboat to be prepared was Lifeboat 7, under the command of First Officer Murdoch's guidance. The crew struggled to maintain order, calling for women and children to step forward. But panic, confusion, and fear spread rapidly among passengers. Some women refused to leave their husbands, choosing to remain aboard, while some men dressed as women in desperate attempts to secure a place. The scene was a chaotic ballet, framed by the cold wind and the faint creaking of the ship as it settled further into the water. Across the deck, officers were faced with an impossible moral and logistical problem: how to prioritize passengers when the law of the sea, women and children first, clashed with desperation. Lifeboats were lowered carefully, yet some left with seats still empty. Stories later recounted by survivors reveal the small, haunting details: a mother insisting her children board while she stayed behind, a wealthy man pleading to join a lifeboat already at capacity, a crewman refusing to leave until the final woman was safely aboard. The lifeboat launches were far from orderly. Lowering the wooden boats along the davits required skill and strength, and the icy ropes often caused delays or near accidents. In one incident, a lifeboat swung violently, almost tipping passengers into the freezing sea. Panic surged in the surrounding crowd as officers worked frantically to stabilize it. Yet, in other instances, lifeboats were launched almost empty, their limited capacity wasted because the crew, cautious or hesitant, did not want to overload the fragile vessels. Among the officers, Fifth Officer Harold Lowe stands out in survivor accounts. Unlike many, he demonstrated extraordinary foresight and courage. After ensuring the initial lifeboats were safely away, he made the critical decision to return to the site of the sinking, rescuing survivors clinging to debris. Lowe's return was one of the rare acts of calculated heroism that saved lives, but it also highlighted how few officers took such risks in a situation where human instinct often favored self-preservation. In first class, panic manifested differently than in the lower decks. Some women screamed for help, others hesitated, unsure of what was happening. Wealthy passengers often believed that their status might afford them some special treatment, but in the cold, impartial logic of survival, it mattered little. The chaos revealed a dark truth: in the face of disaster, social rank could only shield you temporarily. Many who assumed privilege would survive were left scrambling, while others of lower status found ways to endure, sometimes through ingenuity or sheer luck. The contrast with third class was staggering. Locked gates and labyrinthine corridors made reaching the lifeboats a desperate struggle. Some passengers were turned back or delayed by crew trying to maintain order, others found hidden passages and emerged just in time. Families were tragically split, some children rescued while parents remained trapped below deck. These hidden stories, rarely recounted in popular narratives, highlight the sheer randomness and unfairness of survival that night. Even the decisions of the crew carried consequences. Officers feared capsizing the fragile boats if too many boarded. Panic above, caution below, the lifeboats became a delicate gamble, balancing human instinct, maritime law, and the physics of wood and rope. Each launch required calculation, yet time itself was the enemy, as Titanic continued to tilt further forward with every passing minute. The human stories during these lifeboat moments are both heartwarming and haunting. Margaret "Molly" Brown, later dubbed the unsinkable Molly Brown, took charge of her lifeboat, urging women to row with determination and helping maintain order amidst confusion. In contrast, some men resorted to deception or force, climbing aboard through trickery, highlighting the moral gray zone that disaster exposes. Every lifeboat carried not just passengers, but the weight of ethical choices, courage, and desperation. By midnight, Titanic had become a theater of life and death, with the lifeboats as the main stage. Crewmen lowered boats while shouting instructions, passengers scrambled to board, and the icy water lapped at those still on deck. The night air carried the mingled sounds of fear, prayers, and shouting orders, an auditory record of humanity tested to its limits. Yet even as the boats floated away, tragedy persisted. Some were launched half-empty, leaving hundreds behind. Others were dangerously overloaded, rocking precariously in the icy waves. Every choice mattered, every hesitation became a gamble, and every act of bravery or selfishness left its mark on survival statistics. The lifeboats were more than vessels, they were symbols of human choices crystallized in moments of terror. And so, Titanic's passengers faced the ultimate gamble. Will they survive or perish? Would courage be rewarded, or would randomness decide fate? The night's bitter irony was that survival was as much about human decisions as it was about engineering or planning. Those who survived often did so not by merit alone, but by timing, strategy, and sometimes, sheer luck. By 12:30 a.m., many lifeboats had departed, some carrying more passengers than intended, some tragically underfilled. The scene on deck grew chaotic, the ship tilting ominously, the cries of those left behind mixing with the moaning wind. Titanic was no longer a marvel of engineering, it was a crucible of human endurance, morality, and survival. The lifeboat gamble had begun. Every launch, every decision, every hesitation, and every act of courage would determine who lived and who did not. And for those still on the ship, the icy Atlantic waited, silent and indifferent, ready to claim its toll. As the Titanic continued its slow descent into catastrophe, the night revealed the very best and worst of human nature. Amid the freezing darkness, individual choices, brave or selfish, would determine who survived and who did not. This was a night where heroism and villainy were often separated by inches, minutes, or sheer luck, and where ordinary people became legends, while others were condemned to infamy. One of the most celebrated figures to emerge from the chaos was Margaret "Molly" Brown, a wealthy American socialite who refused to remain passive. When her lifeboat was launched, she immediately took charge, urging other women to row with determination, shouting encouragement, and even returning to help guide other lifeboats. Brown refused to succumb to fear. Her voice carried authority and reassurance, defying the panic surrounding her. She embodied courage that was both practical and symbolic, an example of how decisive action could save lives amid utter chaos. In contrast, the tragedy also revealed the darker side of human instinct. Some men, faced with the "women and children first" policy, attempted to force their way into lifeboats. Some disguised themselves as women, others simply lied. One first-class passenger was reported to have offered money to crew members to secure a place in a boat already at capacity. These acts of desperation, selfishness, and deceit served as chilling reminders that in moments of life and death, morality can fracture under pressure. Meanwhile, others demonstrated quiet, unseen heroism. The firemen and engineers below deck refused to abandon their posts, keeping boilers running and lights illuminated for as long as possible. Their efforts allowed many passengers to navigate the corridors and locate lifeboats safely. These men, often uncelebrated, worked in darkness, their hands blistered and bodies cold, fully aware that staying meant almost certain death. They became the hidden backbone of survival, a network of bravery that operated silently while the spotlight shone on the deck above. Acts of selflessness were also seen among the crew. Fifth Officer Harold Lowe, for example, returned to the wreckage after many lifeboats had departed. He rescued dozens of passengers clinging to debris in the freezing Atlantic, rowing back tirelessly despite the risk. Lowe's courage stood in stark contrast to officers who stayed within the relative safety of their lifeboats, demonstrating that bravery was often a choice rather than a requirement of rank. Among passengers, the contrast between heroism and cowardice became even more pronounced. Ida and Isidore Strauss, a wealthy couple, refused to be separated. When given the chance to enter a lifeboat, Isidore insisted that his wife board safely while he remained behind. Their final moments together, holding hands as the water rose, became a lasting symbol of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. They could have survived, but instead chose principle over survival. Not every story was so noble. Panic-induced chaos revealed acts of cruelty as well as cowardice. Some men pushed children aside, others attempted to take lifeboats intended for women. Disagreements erupted over who should board first, leading to shoving, shouting, and even threats with weapons. These acts, horrifying in retrospect, reflected the human instinct to survive at any cost, a natural impulse, yet morally troubling. The night blurred the lines between right and wrong, revealing both extremes of human behavior. Even small gestures carried immense weight. Crewmen distributed blankets, guided children, and reassured panicked women while standing on precarious decks. A steward might help a family onto a lifeboat while another passenger offered his coat to a stranger. These seemingly minor actions often determined whether lives were saved. In contrast, the absence of action, hesitation, indecision, or selfishness, could be equally deadly. In the freezing water, heroism took on a literal life-or-death significance. Passengers clinging to debris had little hope until someone like Lowe, or a courageous crew member in a lifeboat, returned. Men who remained with their families, refusing to push others aside, often succumbed to hypothermia, their noble choices contrasted with those who survived by cunning or brute force. The night also highlighted the unpredictability of survival. Some individuals were saved despite poor choices or unpreparedness, others perished despite careful planning and courage. The icy Atlantic acted as an indifferent arbiter, indifferent to class, gender, or wealth. Human decisions mattered, but the ocean's cruelty was an equalizing force, impartial and unforgiving. In addition to individual acts, entire groups displayed collective heroism. Passengers in certain lifeboats rowed with synchronized determination, helping others stay afloat in the dark, churning water. Others coordinated to guide survivors toward rescuers or to retrieve floating debris. The cooperation among strangers, people who had never met before, demonstrated the profound human instinct for solidarity in moments of extreme peril. At the same time, villainy was not only human. Social constructs, assumptions, and errors of judgment became silent antagonists. Locked gates in third-class corridors, unclear evacuation procedures, and communication failures all contributed to deaths that might have been avoided. The night was not merely a tale of individual courage or cowardice, it was a theater of human systems, some failing spectacularly, some supporting survival quietly in the shadows. By 1 a.m., as the Titanic's bow continued to descend, the night had crystallized into a pattern of stark contrasts: courage and cowardice, selflessness and selfishness, calm and panic, life and death. Every action, every choice, every hesitation carried immense consequences. Some passengers' decisions ensured survival, others sealed their fate. Some officers displayed extraordinary initiative, others deferred responsibility until it was too late. It was a night where ordinary people were transformed into legends, whether remembered or forgotten. Molly Brown, Harold Lowe, the firemen, the Strasses, and countless unnamed crew members exemplified heroism, while acts of deceit, panic, and selfishness revealed the darker tendencies lurking in every human heart. Titanic's final hours were a mirror, reflecting humanity in its most raw and unfiltered form, a blend of heroism, villainy, and everything in between. By 1:30 a.m., Titanic's tilt increased further, the icy water rose relentlessly, and the distinctions between hero and villain blurred in the struggle for survival. The choices made on this night would echo through history, shaping not only the stories of those who lived and died, but the cultural memory of the Titanic itself. Heroes were immortalized, villains were condemned, and countless voices, silent, unseen, or unheard, left only whispers in the cold Atlantic night. Amid the chaos of Titanic's final night, perhaps the most poignant stories are those of the children, innocent, terrified, and utterly powerless against the forces around them. The youngest passengers aboard the Titanic were largely forgotten by history, their voices silent except through the accounts of survivors who witnessed their plight. Yet these children embodied the vulnerability, courage, and tragedy of the night in ways that would haunt witnesses for decades. In third class, families huddled together in cramped cabins. Parents tried to shield their children from the cold, the fear, and the flooding corridors. Young boys clutched wooden toys, unaware that they might soon become the only source of comfort as their world descended into water and darkness. Mothers whispered songs and lullabies, hoping to preserve a sense of normalcy, but the chill of the North Atlantic seeped through every door and beam. Locked gates made escape nearly impossible, forcing some families to make impossible choices, children rescued while parents remained trapped, or siblings separated in the frantic scramble toward lifeboats. Some children, however, displayed a courage beyond their years. Survivors later recounted instances of youngsters leading their siblings through narrow corridors, holding hands tightly and following the faint light of lanterns. One young boy, reportedly 8 years old, carried his infant sibling to a lifeboat, guided by nothing more than instinct and determination. In such moments, innocence met necessity, creating a stark contrast between childhood playfulness and the urgent, life-or-death environment of the ship. In first class, the scene was dramatically different, yet no less harrowing. Children of wealthy families had grown accustomed to opulent surroundings, attending dinners with crystal chandeliers overhead and engaging in leisurely evening activities. Yet in the hours after the iceberg struck, these luxuries offered no protection. Some children were quickly guided into lifeboats by parents or servants, often dressed in oversized coats and carrying small possessions for comfort. Even in the safest lifeboats, the icy winds and rising panic left indelible marks of trauma that would follow them for the rest of their lives. A particularly haunting story involves the French orphans, whose father died in the disaster. They were later discovered through a newspaper photograph, clutching each other for warmth and comfort amid strangers in a lifeboat. Their survival was due not only to chance but also to the selflessness of adults who prioritized children over themselves. Such acts of courage contrast sharply with the stories of families that were tragically separated, emphasizing the randomness and cruelty of fate that night. The experience of children also underscores the contrast between myth and reality. Popular depictions often suggest orderly evacuations, where women and children were swiftly guided to safety. The truth, however, was far more chaotic. Parents were sometimes turned back by crew trying to maintain control, siblings were separated in crowded corridors, and some children were left in locked cabins, their cries muffled by the steel walls of the ship. For every child safely aboard a lifeboat, another was lost to the freezing Atlantic, swallowed silently by the indifferent sea. Yet even in despair, moments of courage shone through. Some children comforted others, offering blankets or sharing food. Others provided hope through their resilience, clinging to life even as adults faltered. These acts, small but profound, remind us that heroism on Titanic was not limited to officers or adults. Children, too, contributed to the survival of others, even if their efforts went unrecognized at the time. As lifeboats were lowered, children were often at the center of ethical dilemmas. Crew members faced agonizing decisions: who could fit aboard? How many could be saved without overloading the boat? In many cases, children were prioritized, their small size allowing them to be placed where adults could not. Yet the decisions were never easy, and some were heartbreaking. Witnesses later described the gut-wrenching moment when a parent had to let go of a child's hand, sending them safely into a lifeboat while remaining behind themselves. These choices would define the emotional legacy of Titanic's tragedy for decades to come. On deck, the chilling cold intensified the peril for children. Hypothermia threatened even those who had made it onto the boats, and the bitter wind whipped across open decks, stripping warmth and hope in equal measure. For those left behind, the icy water claimed them almost instantly. Accounts from survivors later painted a haunting tableau: children clinging to floating debris, crying out in confusion and terror, their tiny bodies shivering in the unforgiving sea. The stories of Titanic's children are more than statistics, they are intimate human narratives that illuminate the horror, courage, and randomness of survival. They remind us that the disaster was not only a story of engineering failure or hubris, but of individual human experiences, vivid, personal, and often tragic. In the contrast between the innocence of youth and the cruelty of circumstance, Titanic's final night becomes even more poignant, a night where childhood itself was tested against the cold logic of nature and human limitations. By the early hours of April 15, the night had revealed the resilience and fragility of the youngest souls aboard. Some survived to tell their stories, forever haunted by what they witnessed; others vanished beneath the waves, their voices silenced but not forgotten. In remembering the children of Titanic, we preserve the most vulnerable human stories of that night, illuminating the raw, unfiltered reality behind the myth of calm and order. As the Titanic's final hours unfolded, the cold became as deadly as the ocean itself. The North Atlantic in April is merciless, with water temperatures barely above freezing. For those who remained in the icy sea or clinging to debris, the Atlantic was not merely a backdrop, it was an omnipresent killer, indifferent to status, age, or courage. Survival was a matter of inches, seconds, and raw human endurance. When the lifeboats drifted away from the sinking ship, thousands were left behind in the freezing darkness. Hypothermia set in almost immediately. Within minutes, exposed skin began to numb, limbs stiffened, and breathing became shallow and labored. Survivors would later recall that even the strongest swimmers, fueled by adrenaline, could not withstand the cold for more than a few minutes. The Atlantic, silent and vast, was an impartial executioner. Amid the water, desperation became a lifeline. Groups of passengers clung to pieces of debris, wooden doors, collapsible boats, and anything that floated. Strangers huddled together for warmth, sharing their small, fleeting comfort as the cold sapped their strength. A young boy, gripping a lifeboat, later described the sensation as like being held in the jaws of ice itself, capturing the relentless bite of the Atlantic. Every movement in the water was agony, every breath was a fight against the chill that stole life slowly but unyieldingly. The freezing water did more than numb, it separated. Panic, confusion, and the instinct for self-preservation meant that some clung to debris, while others, weaker or exhausted, sank quietly beneath the waves. Friendships, families, and couples were torn apart in seconds. The Atlantic was impartial, it gave no preference to the strong, the wealthy, or the noble-hearted. Its cold was the great equalizer, swallowing titles, wealth, and innocence alike. Some survivors were rescued by the return of courageous crew members like Fifth Officer Harold Lowe, who rode into the dark waters multiple times to gather those struggling on floating debris. His efforts were heroic, but he could only save a fraction of those left behind. Many succumbed to the cold before help could reach them, their final moments unrecorded, lost to the silent depths of the Atlantic. The psychological impact of the freezing waters was equally devastating. Panic amplified the physical agony. People screamed for help, their voices hoarse from cold and exertion, often only to hear the wind and waves answer. Some fainted in shock, others were forced to make impossible decisions, cling to a friend, or let go to save themselves. The human mind, stripped to survival instincts, was tested as brutally as the body. Children in the water faced particular peril. Tiny bodies could not resist the cold, their limbs stiffened rapidly, their shivering uncontrollable. Mothers who had ensured their children reached lifeboats or debris often saw them vanish into the dark waves moments later. Even those who made it to floating wreckage could not always survive the hours before rescue. The Atlantic, vast and indifferent, tolerated no mistake, no delay, no hesitation. The night was long, stretching into early morning, and the silence of the ocean was punctuated only by cries, splashes, and the occasional shout from a lifeboat rescuing survivors. As hours passed, the cold penetrated deep into the marrow, stealing strength, hope, and life. Even the bravest, clinging to floating wood or each other, found that time itself had become a relentless adversary. The phenomenon of cold shock played a fatal role. Victims of the Titanic often survived the initial plunge but were incapacitated by involuntary gasping, hyperventilation, and rapid loss of muscle control. Many could not even hold on to debris long enough to await rescue. Some who initially floated with seeming hope were pulled under within minutes. The Atlantic spared no one, and its icy grip ensured that survival was never guaranteed, no matter one's willpower or courage. Yet amid this horror, small moments of human resilience flickered like fragile flames. Strangers encouraged each other to hold on, whispered prayers to keep hope alive, or shared physical warmth. Those saved would later recount the camaraderie formed in death's shadow, the desperate humanity that surfaced in the most extreme conditions. For some, holding hands or gripping a friend's arm was the difference between life and oblivion, a poignant testament to the instinct for connection even in the face of annihilation. By the time the Carpathia arrived hours later, hundreds had already succumbed to the ocean. The ship's crew, witnessing the scattered survivors on debris and lifeboats, described the scene as haunting and surreal. Bodies floating in silence, the shattered remnants of a grand ship, and the icy Atlantic stretching endlessly into the horizon, the scale of tragedy was almost incomprehensible. The frozen waters had claimed more than 1,500 lives, leaving an indelible mark on history. Titanic's story in the Atlantic is a story of contrasts, life and death, hope and despair, resilience and surrender. The cold was both enemy and judge, impartial and unyielding, indifferent to courage, class, or will. Those who survived owed their lives to quick thinking, luck, and, in many cases, the selflessness of others willing to risk their own survival. Every frozen wave became a testament to human vulnerability and endurance, a silent witness to one of history's most infamous maritime disasters. The Atlantic remained, as ever, vast, dark, and indifferent. Titanic itself lay shattered beneath the waves, its passengers lost to history except for the stories carried by the few who survived. The frozen waters were a reminder that, no matter human ambition, nature retains the ultimate authority, a cold, unfeeling arbiter of life and death. Even as Titanic sank into the icy Atlantic, the wireless room remained a lifeline between the ship and the outside world. Amid chaos and fear, the Morse code messages sent by Jack Phillips and Harold Bride became desperate appeals, silent prayers transmitted through the night to anyone who could hear. These messages, overlooked by some, ignored by others, and heroically relayed in part by few, represent both the triumphs and tragic failures of human communication in the face of disaster. At 12:15 a.m., the first distress signals were sent. Titanic's powerful Marconi wireless system allowed Phillips and Bride to tap out the now famous CQD messages, an early distress call meaning, all stations, distress. Soon after, they began using SOS, which had been officially adopted just a few years prior. The code was simple, but the message carried immense weight. Help was needed immediately, and thousands of lives hung in the balance. In the wireless room, chaos reigned. Phillips, exhausted from hours of relaying passenger messages, tapped frantically at the keys. Bride assisted, relaying incoming messages and managing the delicate equipment. The air was filled with the constant buzz of the wireless signals, punctuated by the occasional frantic shout from the bridge. Every dot and dash was a race against time, a lifeline thrown into a vast and indifferent ocean. Some ships received the distress signals immediately. The Carpathia, hundreds of miles away, responded with extraordinary speed, altering course through the night to reach the sinking liner. Messages from Titanic described the situation with urgency, water rising rapidly, lifeboats being deployed, and the ship's bow settling ever deeper. Yet other vessels, closer to Titanic, failed to act. The Californian, only a few miles away, had shut down its wireless for the night. Its operator, Cyril Evans, had gone to bed, unaware that a catastrophe was unfolding just over the horizon. This disparity between communication and action highlights one of the cruelest ironies of the Titanic disaster. Messages had been sent, warnings had been received, yet human inaction and technological limitations magnified the tragedy. Phillips' repeated calls for assistance were heroic, but the fragmented nature of wireless communication at the time meant that not all pleas reached the right ears in time. Phillips and Bride also faced the difficult task of relaying personal messages from passengers to the outside world. Wealthy first-class travelers continued to request urgent telegrams to New York, even as lifeboats were lowered and the ship's tilt increased. The wireless operators balanced these demands with the dire necessity of calling for rescue, their fingers tapping desperately against the keys as the Atlantic swallowed their colleagues and friends below decks. The Morse code messages became a chronicle of humanity under extreme pressure. Each repeated call for help carried a mounting urgency. "We are sinking fast," one message read. Another, "Come as quickly as possible." Every word transmitted was a tiny lifeline, a fragile thread of hope connecting desperate souls in the icy Atlantic to distant hands that could, if only in time, save them. Survivor accounts recall the strange contrast between the technology's efficiency and its limitations. Titanic's wireless could transmit distress across hundreds of miles almost instantly, yet the human factor, operator fatigue, misinterpretation, or inattentiveness, meant that even the most urgent pleas could be delayed or ignored. The messages in the ice were not just technical communications, they were echoes of human desperation, transmitted through static and night into a cold, indifferent world. As the hours wore on, the wireless room became a stage of heroism. Bride assisted Phillips, keeping him alert, and ensured that incoming replies were recorded. Together, they coordinated with nearby ships, relaying coordinates and information about lifeboat launches. Their determination undoubtedly saved lives, as the Carpathia would later arrive in time to rescue over 700 survivors. Yet for every message answered, countless cries went unheard, swallowed by the Atlantic or lost in the chaos of human error. The messages also captured moments of human connection amidst disaster. Phillips relayed notes from passengers to loved ones, giving them one last chance to communicate. A mother's plea for her children, a husband's reassurance to his wife, or a friend's urgent warning, these personal dispatches, sent into the night, became tiny threads of hope in a tapestry of fear. They reminded the world that Titanic was not only a ship of steel and engineering, but a floating community of lives intertwined in ways both intimate and fleeting. Even after the last lifeboat departed, the wireless room remained a hub of activity. Phillips continued sending signals until the water rose to his position, and Bride kept working, attempting to maintain contact for as long as possible. Their voices, carried in code, became part of Titanic's final story, messages in the ice, frozen in time, recording desperation, bravery, and a relentless pursuit of connection. By the time the Carpathia reached the scene, the wireless messages had achieved what they could, guiding rescuers to the survivors, transmitting coordinates, and preserving a record of human determination. Yet the tragedy remained vast. Many messages were never answered, many pleas went unheard, and the icy Atlantic claimed far more lives than technology could save. These messages are a haunting reminder that even in the face of innovation and heroism, nature, and circumstance, can overwhelm human effort. Titanic's wireless messages in the night were more than distress signals, they were the voice of humanity itself, reaching out across darkness, technology, and time. They captured the paradox of the night, how human ingenuity can shine brilliantly even as tragedy unfolds, and how communication, heroism, and error all intersect to shape history. In the frozen Atlantic, these Morse code cries became eternal echoes, preserving the memory of Titanic and the desperate souls aboard her. The Titanic's final descent into the Atlantic is a moment that continues to haunt history, an event that transformed a marvel of human engineering into a symbol of tragedy and hubris. By the early hours of April 15, 1912, the bow had plunged far below the surface, the ship's stern rising high into the freezing sky before gravity completed its ruthless work. The final minutes were a terrifying ballet of physics, fear, and the raw power of nature. As the bow settled deeper into the icy waters, the angle of tilt increased rapidly. Passengers clinging to the upper decks held on desperately, their screams mingling with the roar of the ocean and the creaking of strained metal. Crew members continued to urge calm, shouting instructions while struggling to maintain balance on sloping decks. Yet every moment of human effort was dwarfed by the inexorable pull of the Atlantic, the ship's colossal weight dragging it down. In these final moments, the Titanic's internal dynamics became catastrophic. Water rushed into the lower compartments with increasing force, filling the last remaining watertight sections. The engine stuttered, groaned, and finally ceased, plunging the ship into near-total silence beneath the wind and waves. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes, lights flickered, and the ship's grand halls, once bustling with laughter and elegance, became death traps of steel and water. On the decks, panic reached its peak. Lifeboats had been launched, but many remained in the water or swamped by passengers attempting last-minute escape. Men, women, and children fought to maintain footing on the sloping decks, sometimes slipping into the freezing ocean below. The air was thick with the cries of despair, prayers, and the harsh commands of officers trying to manage the chaos. Each second stretched into an eternity, as passengers realized the end was inevitable. Witnesses later recounted the horrifying split of the Titanic's structure. Contrary to popular myth, the ship did not break immediately upon impact with the iceberg. The final descent saw the stern arch skyward as the bow filled with water, stretching steel beyond its limits. Moments later, a deafening crack echoed through the night as the ship's midsection gave way. Titanic's stern lurched violently before settling slowly, leaving those clinging to the deck to face the sea alone. This catastrophic structural failure was both sudden and precise, a dramatic reminder of the forces unleashed when human ambition meets nature's unforgiving laws. As passengers were plunged into the freezing waters, human instinct collided with tragedy. Some scrambled for debris, others tried to hold onto floating wreckage or lifeboats. Hypothermia took its toll almost immediately, claiming those who could not maintain grip or strength. The cold was an indifferent arbiter, it claimed the strong and weak alike, the young and the old, the wealthy and the working class. Survival was an improbable, fleeting miracle. Amid the horror, acts of courage persisted. Crew members and passengers risked their lives to help others, pulling individuals from the water or supporting them on lifeboats. Some lifeboats returned to pick up floating survivors, an extraordinary act of bravery given the risk of capsizing. Others sacrificed their chance at safety to remain with loved ones, choosing principle over survival. These acts, heroic in the extreme, stand as timeless reminders of humanity's capacity for selflessness even in the darkest moments. The final moments of the Titanic also revealed the eerie silence that followed the chaos. Once the ship sank, a profound stillness descended upon the Atlantic. The cries, screams, and collisions of steel were replaced by the cold, quiet ocean. Debris floated silently across the surface, carrying the remnants of luxury, humanity, and life. Survivors in lifeboats described the surreal transition, from chaotic terror to an almost dreamlike calm, interrupted only by the shivering and groaning of those who had endured the freezing waters. The cold night sky bore witness to the enormity of the disaster. Stars reflected off the calm patches of water, creating a stark contrast with the devastation below. The Atlantic, dark and endless, had claimed over 1,500 lives, leaving the Titanic itself hidden beneath the waves, a massive monument to both human ingenuity and fallibility. The survivors, huddled in lifeboats, bore witness to history, their experiences forever altering the collective memory of the tragedy. The final descent of Titanic was not just a physical event, it was also a moral and emotional crucible. It revealed the extremes of human behavior, the limitations of technology, and the indifferent power of nature. Every decision made in those final minutes, who to save, how to act, what to leave behind, was amplified by the immediacy of death and the relentless cold. Those choices, for better or worse, have become etched in the story of Titanic, shaping our understanding of courage, sacrifice, and human frailty. In retrospect, the sinking was a convergence of hubris, misjudgment, and circumstance. Titanic's designers, confident in their unsinkable vessel, had underestimated the Atlantic's power. Crew members, despite valiant efforts, were overwhelmed by scale and chaos. Passengers, unprepared for disaster, faced impossible choices. And yet, amid the tragedy, humanity's noblest traits emerged: selflessness, courage, and resilience, standing starkly against the indifferent, frozen abyss. By the early hours of dawn, the Titanic had disappeared beneath the waves, leaving only survivors, floating debris, and the icy Atlantic itself as witnesses. The final descent had transformed a technological marvel into a haunting legend, a story of human ambition, error, and endurance that continues to captivate the world. It is a story frozen in time, a testament to the fragility of life and the power of the sea, and a reminder that even in disaster, acts of heroism and courage endure long after the ship has vanished. The Titanic did not sink into obscurity, its tragedy reverberated across the globe, shaping maritime law, popular culture, and collective memory for over a century. The ship's final hours, once a horrifying headline, became a symbol of human ambition, folly, and the fragility of life. The legacy of Titanic is not merely a story of a ship lost at sea, it is a mirror reflecting society's triumphs, mistakes, and enduring fascination with disaster. In the immediate aftermath, public reaction was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and anger. Newspapers around the world carried accounts of heroism, panic, and unimaginable loss. The sheer scale of the tragedy, over 1,500 lives lost, was almost impossible to comprehend. Families mourned the dead, survivors grappled with guilt and trauma. Stories of extraordinary bravery, like that of Molly Brown, and heartbreaking loss, like the Strauss family, captured the imagination of the public. The Titanic had become a cultural touchstone, a narrative woven from human experience as much as engineering failure. The disaster also exposed glaring inadequacies in maritime safety regulations. Lifeboat capacity, emergency procedures, and communication protocols were scrutinized in unprecedented detail. The British Board of Trade and U.S. Senate held investigations, revealing that Titanic carried lifeboats for only about half of its passengers and that wireless communication protocols were insufficient. These findings led to sweeping reforms. Ships were required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board, maintain 24-hour wireless operations, and conduct regular emergency drills. Titanic's sinking, horrific as it was, directly saved countless lives in the years that followed. Beyond policy changes, Titanic reshaped societal perceptions of class, privilege, and survival. The stark contrast between first-class and third-class experiences highlighted deep social inequities. While wealth could provide comfort and access to lifeboats, it could not guarantee survival. Third-class passengers faced structural obstacles and bureaucratic barriers, often struggling to reach safety. These disparities became central to the historical narrative, reminding future generations that tragedy does not strike evenly, and that human systems can amplify suffering in times of crisis. The cultural impact of Titanic extended into literature, film, and art. Books, plays, and documentaries have recounted both factual and dramatized versions of the disaster, emphasizing heroism, romance, and human tragedy. The 1997 blockbuster film reignited global interest, cementing Titanic as a symbol of both human ambition and vulnerability. Museums, memorials, and exhibitions worldwide continue to preserve artifacts and personal stories, allowing modern audiences to connect with the lived experiences of passengers and crew. The shipwreck itself, discovered in 1985, became a focal point for exploration, archaeology, and reflection, revealing tangible evidence of both human ingenuity and failure. Titanic's legacy is also deeply psychological. Survivors carried trauma, survivors' guilt, and haunting memories for the rest of their lives. Children who survived faced lifelong challenges, shaped by the frozen Atlantic and the choices of that night. Even descendants of passengers continue to study the disaster, seeking connection with relatives lost or saved, preserving memory as a bridge across generations. The Titanic is not simply a historical event, it is a shared human experience, passed down through storytelling, research, and personal reflection. In maritime culture, Titanic became a cautionary tale, a reminder of hubris in the face of nature. Engineers, captains, and shipbuilders studied its design failures, navigation decisions, and emergency responses to prevent similar catastrophes. The term unsinkable itself became a symbol of human overconfidence, a lesson echoing far beyond maritime circles into broader discussions of technology, risk, and ethics. Titanic's story reminds us that even the most advanced creations are vulnerable, and that human judgment, no matter how skilled, can never fully control nature. The disaster also inspired acts of remembrance and charity. Memorials were erected in Southampton, Belfast, New York, and across Europe, honoring both the heroic and the ordinary. Organizations dedicated to maritime safety and disaster preparedness drew lessons directly from Titanic's sinking. Even today, Titanic continues to serve as a teaching tool, reminding societies of the need for vigilance, preparedness, and compassion in crisis. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of Titanic's legacy is its emotional resonance. The ship, passengers, and crew have become symbols in stories of courage, loss, and human resilience. Families, historians, and enthusiasts continually uncover personal letters, diaries, and artifacts, connecting us to the human dimension of the tragedy. These stories keep the memory alive, ensuring that Titanic is remembered not merely as steel and machinery lost at sea, but as a vessel carrying dreams, fears, and lives forever altered by one fateful night. Ultimately, the Titanic serves as both a historical lesson and a human story. It reminds us of our vulnerability, the limits of technology, the consequences of hubris, and the power of courage and selflessness. The legacy of Titanic is not just preserved in museums, films, or books, it lives in the collective consciousness, a story continually retold, reinterpreted, and remembered. The tragedy, frozen in time, continues to teach, warn, and inspire, bridging history and human experience in ways that few events ever have. The story of Titanic does not end with its descent into the icy Atlantic. Its memory continues to resonate across time, reminding us of human ambition, ingenuity, courage, and vulnerability. In the aftermath, Titanic became more than a shipwreck, it became a symbol, a mirror reflecting both the brilliance and fallibility of humankind. Remembering Titanic is not simply about recounting the tragedy, it is about understanding the lives, choices, and legacies of those who were aboard. In the immediate hours and days following the disaster, newspapers worldwide carried harrowing stories of loss, survival, and heroism. Survivors returned to families, often carrying guilt alongside grief, while the world struggled to comprehend the scale of the catastrophe. Over 1,500 lives had been claimed by the Atlantic, yet the stories of those who survived, by luck, courage, or sheer determination, became enduring narratives of human resilience. These personal stories transformed Titanic from a statistic into a deeply human event, a reminder that history is made up of individual experiences, not just dates and numbers. Memorials and museums stand today as tangible testaments to Titanic's enduring impact. Artifacts recovered from the wreck, preserved in exhibitions, allow modern audiences to connect with the past in profound ways. From the grand first-class china to the simple personal belongings of third-class passengers, every item tells a story of daily life interrupted, of lives cut short, and of courage amidst chaos. These relics preserve not only material history but the emotional and cultural essence of Titanic, allowing us to see the human dimension behind the steel and engineering. The legacy of Titanic also endures in maritime law and safety regulations. Lessons learned from the disaster reshaped international standards: sufficient lifeboats, mandatory wireless communications, continuous monitoring, and better training for crew members. These reforms ensured that the tragedy, while devastating, was not in vain. In a sense, every policy change, every improvement in safety, is a living echo of Titanic, proof that history can guide humanity toward greater wisdom and preparedness. Titanic's story is also a cultural touchstone, permeating literature, film, music, and art. The ship's tragic tale has been recounted in countless books, plays, and documentaries, while films have immortalized the romance, fear, and heroism of the night. Each retelling brings new perspective, highlighting different aspects: the bravery of individuals, the stark realities of class differences, or the dramatic final moments. Through these stories, Titanic remains alive in the collective imagination, bridging generations and reminding us of the human emotions that underlie historical events. But beyond policy, culture, and memorials, Titanic is remembered because it speaks to universal human experiences: the confrontation with mortality, the unpredictable nature of fate, and the capacity for both nobility and selfishness in extreme circumstances. Passengers, crew, and children alike face decisions no one should have to make, yet their choices continue to inspire, provoke reflection, and evoke empathy. Each act of courage, each moment of selflessness, and even every instance of panic or misjudgment becomes a lesson in the complexity of human behavior under pressure. The frozen Atlantic, which claimed so many lives, also preserved the ship's memory. The discovery of the wreck in 1985 brought Titanic back into the public eye, revealing the scale of the disaster in haunting detail. Exploring the ship's remains, historians and archaeologists uncovered both grandeur and tragedy: luxurious first-class cabins, damaged decks, and the silent remnants of those who perished. The wreck is a somber reminder that human achievement and human vulnerability coexist, and that even the greatest marvels can be humbled by nature's indifferent force. Remembering Titanic also means honoring the stories of the forgotten. While famous survivors and wealthy passengers often dominate narratives, countless lives remain unrecorded, lost in the icy depths. Third-class passengers, crew members, and children, these voices, though less celebrated, are central to the true story of Titanic. By remembering them, we preserve the fullness of the human experience, its courage, its tragedy, and its enduring capacity for empathy. Ultimately, Titanic endures because it embodies contradictions: hubris and humility, wealth and vulnerability, despair and heroism. Its story compels us to reflect not only on a singular event in history but on broader human themes. Every memorial, every story, every artifact ensures that Titanic is not forgotten, that the lessons learned are not ignored, and that the human experiences of that night continue to inform and inspire. As we look back over the decades, the Titanic's legacy is clear: it is a story of lives lived, choices made, and lessons learned. It is a testament to the power of human memory, the importance of preparation, and the enduring influence of history on future generations. To remember Titanic is to honor those who perished, celebrate those who survived, and acknowledge the profound lessons that a single night in April 1912 continues to teach the world.